Let's bring in committee to Unleash Prosperity co-founder and former Trump economic advisor Steve Moore, along with Fox News contributor Liz Peek. What a great panel. Thank you both for coming in. Steve, I cribbed that chart from your hotline feature this morning, but it came from a guy named Dan Schneider. He used to be the chief economist for the House Ways and Means Committee, the tax writing committee in Congress, and he got all of his data from the Tax Policy Center. That's basically a group that's to the left of the political spectrum, right?
It is, and it is an amazing chart. This even surprised me because, I thought, oh, well, the people at the very top are going to get, the lower tax rates and so on. But this really was a tax cut aimed at middle-class folks. We wanted to lower the rates. We wanted to lower we had the highest corporate tax rate in the world. We also, for millions and millions of middle-class people, we allowed them to just take a standard deduction, because remember, David, we doubled that. And that was one of the great it wasn't just that they saved money on that, it's that it simplified the tax system for tens of millions of Americans, because all they had to do was check a box. They didn't have to keep, shoe boxes full of receipts. But I'm really surprised, David, I had not seen that poll that a majority of Democrats support all the aspects of the bill. Why are the Democrats all voting against it?
Yeah. But Liz, they say it, and I mean the Republicans too, that government is the problem. But they don't vote against government in the form of spending cuts. And I understand that this bill, that you need to pass the tax cut and make them permanent. I get that, and that we need growth. But we need spending cuts because the amount of interest alone that we're paying is crowding out other spending. And we will eventually have to hike taxes on the middle class to cover the interest payments to bondholders overseas and to the bondholders in this country who happen to be rich.
Well, first of all, Dagan, I agree with you. I'm disappointed that there aren't more cuts in this bill. After all, we saw spending bounce up $2 trillion a year during COVID, and boy, it just stayed right there, despite the COVID going away and the economy coming back very strongly. So that's disappointing. But remember that all the language about the 2017 Jobs Act also was wrong. That when the projections were made by the CBO, they had way lower than real growth numbers in there. They expected growth of the economy about 1.8%. It came in at 3%. And they expected the deficit and to be bigger than it was because they expected revenues to be much lower than they actually materialized. So I think we'll see the same thing with this bill, that it actually does stimulate growth. The numbers will be better over the next decade than the CBO is now projecting. You and I may not be happy with the spending number, but hopefully, ultimately, the deficits will come down.
Steve, there's something in the tax field that I'm not that happy about. The Great Disappearing Act of that 15% corporate rate, which was a tremendous idea from the president to reward people for manufacturing stuff here at home, bring them down to 50. Why not just get that flat 15% rate, get rid of all of the bells and whistles that they say bring you to an effective 15% rate? Just clearly go for the 15% corporate rate and leave it at that.
I agree. It's one of my only big disappointments in that bill. I think it's a good bill out of the House, but it's not a great bill. And, from the moment I first met Donald Trump with your buddy Larry Kudlow of Fox Business, Trump was always talking about, this was 8 years ago, 9 years ago, he's saying, I want a 15%, business tax rate. I want the lowest in the world. And we got it down to 21%, but then he ran for re-election, and he ran on that, David. He said, I want a 15% corporate rate. So I would argue he's got a mandate from the voters to do this. And I want to remind people of one other thing. Look, this is a very good bill. It has to pass. It's a must-pass bill. But for the most part, really what it does is just extend what's already in the current law, David. And so what I'm saying is, hey, let's put a little more juice in it and have that 15% corporate rate.
And Liz, before we go, and to remind people, as much as I might bitch and moan about that stupid state and local tax deduction going up 4 times, which I hope that the Senate just goes and gets rid of it, every Democrat in the House voted for, and every Democrat in the Senate will likely vote for a $4.5 trillion tax increase on working Americans. Final word.
Yeah, and by the way, that's what Kamala Harris ran on, which I was astounded that she thought voters were actually going to be pretty impressed by raising taxes on her, and obviously, Dagan, which would completely crush the economy. So this is a must pass. I think it will pass. It's never going to be as good as we hope it will be.
Yep. That's why we're not lawmakers.
Yeah, right. By the way,
That's exactly right.
The sausage
in
making,
1986, when Reagan brought the rate down to 28%, the top rate, there were 136 Democrats in Congress who voted for that, and 23 senators who voted for that. Times have changed.
Well, that's when they weren't communists.
That's
Steve
a
Moore
good point.
and Liz Peek. Thank you both.